From ITRenew, please welcome Ali Fenn.
I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but it is so amazing to see people in 3D. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you for having us. Super excited to be back and actually have real engagements with people. We are here today to talk about Edge, especially Edge in the most sustainable way. So thank you, Rebecca, for inadvertently teeing up both Edge and sustainability for me. Super important topics, and I'm glad to be here with my co-collaborator, Jim Simonelli from Schneider, who is also driving these things. And it's an important part of what we're here to talk about, which is that this is a massive, open possibility for this community in a very, very unique way, and it's here today, but it requires new kinds of collaborations, which is perfectly what this community is suited for. So let's dive in. Edge is massive. It's not just a buzzword, it's here, but it means lots of different things to lots of different people. So our thesis is that Edge is an opportunity for not just new purpose-built Edge micro data centers and other facilities, but for every real estate owner globally to participate in the massively distributed network of compute and infrastructure that is going to be essential for us all to realize the positive potential of 5G, of IoT, of smart everything, remote everything, the world that we live in. And it's a hardware opportunity, which we'll talk about. So what's driving it? Well, there's going to be 175 zettabytes of data created by 2025, according to IDC. There's going to be 75 billion connected devices. We're already up, heading towards 1 billion plus 5G connections, up from just 10 million a year ago. And super importantly, by 2025, Gartner thinks 75% of enterprise data is going to be created at the edge. That's going to demand a whole new kind of infrastructure that we're not prepared for yet, but it's in our fingertips right now, and we actually have the solutions. We just have to think about them differently. What about that infrastructure? 50% of IT capacity expected to be deployed at the edge by 2025. This is super fast. One autonomous vehicle is expected to create as much data every hour as 3,000 people. Immense amounts of data. Power. What is all that compute infrastructure at the edge going to do? Well, today it's about 40% of power tied to compute is at the edge and 60% in core central data centers. That's going to flip. And cost is a problem, right? We got to get all this infrastructure out. It's massive amounts of hardware. But today, the best analysis shows that an average edge platform deployment costs about 55% more than a super optimized regional or central data center. So we have to think about how do we deploy all this stuff at scale to enable the possibilities, but do it in a way that our budgets can tolerate, right? How are we going to get it out there? It's a big challenge. Rebecca also teed up that this stuff is massively distributed. It's heterogeneous. So we have to think about what are the new imperatives that we have to wrestle with? Well, obviously distributed makes it more difficult, but environment, right? So hot areas, cold areas, dirty areas, clean areas, small form factors, big form factors, everything's going to demand us thinking about topology in a really different way and managing that stuff in a different way. And how are we going to think about this massively distributed environment where we don't have the skills, environments are not staffed with engineers, right? When you're thinking about gas stations, roadways, cell towers, airports, smart campuses, whatever it is, right? All of these are opportunities for edge infrastructure and for people to run not only their own applications at the edge, but participate in enabling the edge more broadly and also generating new monetization models, which we'll talk about today as well. But we have to think about what are the complexities that arise from all of this infrastructure in a radically different kind of form factor and environment than we've thought about in the past. So back to this cost question. If it's more expensive to do it at the edge, well, wait a minute. We're not all hyperscale companies with nearly infinite resources. We have to think about other people being able to, in more normal-sized budgets, being able to enable all this stuff. So how do we think about delivering at scale with very cost-effective resources? And then from a business model perspective, same thing, right? Amazon was able to say, hey, if I build it, people are going to come. And that worked out really, really well. But I don't know that that's going to be true in every edge environment. How are people going to get conviction to invest, to deploy infrastructure, not yet knowing who's going to come, how are they going to come, what are they going to do, right? So we have to figure out a way to kind of catalyze the edge that is necessarily requires us to think about collaborations and doing it differently. Sustainability. This is super important, right? You've heard some of the stats about energy consumption. You've heard some of the stats about data center industry. It's way bigger than that, right? We have a collective imperative to think about the sustainability of everything that we're doing, and we are underpinning every industry in the world. So sustainability globally is our problem. PUE, centralized data centers. We've done a phenomenal job on this, and we must keep going. Great, keep going on renewables. All that is essential. When we think about the edge, PUE is not going to be anywhere near as good in kind of adapted data center type locations and other locations at the edge, but we're probably going to get a benefit from less data transport and the energy that's associated there. We don't know exactly where it's going to land, but we have to think about it. Grid mix. You can't sit every edge location, every edge deployment at the Arctic Circle and get perfectly clean grids. So we have to assume that if we have a globally distributed edge network, then we have the global average in grid mix, and it's not very clean. So we got to keep working on that. Manufacturing is the big one. We're talking about hardware. This is a hardware community. It's going to take an immense amount of hardware to enable everything that we want to do together. And it turns out, if you look from CDP or any of the other research that's out there, supply chain carbon, manufacturing carbon is way bigger than operating carbon. So we have to think about what the new models are here, and we'll talk about specifically recertified IT. In the IT space, for OCP racks, in common deployment models, as much as 75% of the total carbon attached to that rack comes from manufacturing. So we have to think about new ways. We're going to argue at ITRenew that we think about it in a recertified way. Huge opportunity there. All of this is a huge opportunity for OCP. This is the perfect community to come together and say, hey, we don't have to invent a bunch of stuff. We have the tools, we have the solutions. What we have to do is put them together in different ways that enable us to operate in these in radically different environments. If we do that, it's open. We have all this possibility. We can do things differently. It enables breakthrough total cost of ownership. It enables huge financial opportunity. And I would argue it enables us collectively to think about how do we leap to the fore? How does OCP immediately jump those growth stats that Bill put up on the screen? We can go bigger, we can go faster if we think about OCP equipment in all of these edge locations. Let's challenge, let's take this landscape, right? It's a huge opportunity because we do have the solutions and we have the community members. We have to be collaborating across everything from OT to IT to power to cooling to orchestration of capacity and maximization and so forth, which we'll talk about all here because collaboration is the key. What are the critical imperatives? I've touched on some of this. I don't have to tell anybody in this room how much more difficult it is to deploy, manage, service hardware in highly distributed and heterogeneous kinds of environments. When we think about those environments, it becomes very clear that we have to think about the integration of IT and OT. We have to think about all-in-one. We have to think about easy. We have to think about that across the life cycle, from deployment to management to end of life. Integrated service models, a single hand to shake. Public cloud taught everybody that it should be as easy to go click, 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 small, medium, large, and I'm up and going. But there's inherently a whole bunch of workload that's never going to run in public cloud environments. And we have to deliver that same user experience. And it's harder at the edge, but we have the ability to do it. We're going to talk about that today to make this real in terms of this is happening today with partnerships. No one company can do this by themselves. And then the last thing is we have to think about, well, not the last thing, second to last thing, power, efficiency. How do we get smarter about capacity utilization in these environments? That's a big challenge, and we have some opportunities there too. And then we have to think about both the cost and the sustainability piece of this. We have to challenge old status quo models. We cannot assume that anybody has the budgets or the governance capability and appetite right now to just trash the planet as we do this, right? So again, there's a huge opportunity for us to rethink business models generally, but one of those is how to think about sustainable hardware. And of course, we want to talk more about that as we go. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Simonelli from Schneider, who's going to come and take you guys through a use case that's very real, that's happening, a couple of examples in how we're making this real as a community.
All right. Thank you, Allie. So my job here is I want to get more concrete here. I want to share a bit of how we can tie open compute and edge in some real use cases. So with that, I'm going to do this by talking about two use cases from two companies, relatively small companies, that have common challenges as well. So the first company is APC Towers. This is a classic tower operator that is going to deploy new equipment for their network and are considering, as they're deploying that new equipment, is what more can they do with it beyond their core operating model. The second is Integrated Roadways, is building out smart infrastructure for smart highways and smart cities. Now, both of these companies have some things in common. They have great property near highly densely populated areas. They have great network access, and they each have their own core business models. But they're thinking about the challenges. And there's really two challenges that come to mind is, first is, gosh, if I'm spending capital in deploying compute at the edge, are there new business models that I can do beyond my core to improve my return on investment? The second challenge is, as we've talked about, is that it's complex. We're not all big hyperscalers. The idea is, gosh, how do we deploy compute, software, physical infrastructure in a standardized, scalable way from dozens to hundreds to thousands? So those are the challenges that they also share, as well as the opportunities. And we've been working with them and thinking about this, and the question is can it be done? Can these challenges be overcome? And we think that the answer is yes. But it isn't easy. We all know that any capital investment comes with associated risk. Both of these companies have lots of risk factors based on their own vectors, their own types of investors. But they sort of come down to three areas that are their collective high risks. The first, as I've mentioned before, is that these are not large companies. They do not have expertise across multi-domains. They know their domains quite well. When you start getting into compute, when you start getting into new types of software, and how to service and manage this at scale, that's a challenge for them. So the fundamental question is, how do we make this more simple? The second is, none of these companies, or none of us, I would put forward, have a crystal ball. We don't have smart cities everywhere. We don't have smart corridors everywhere. We do not have compute everywhere on every rooftop, et cetera. And while they have confidence in their core business models, they are looking for ways to perhaps de-risk that a bit. Are there new revenue streams that, while they're deploying the compute, that they can actually take advantage of without having to be experts in that model? And the last, as we talked about, all these companies have investors. And those investors expect these companies to grow in a responsible way, which means they really have to tick the sustainability box as well. So how are they addressing this in the real world, and what are they doing today? So I want to first address how they're de-risking or enhancing their return on investment. And both of these companies have decided to deploy hardware, no surprise, open compute hardware, and not just to run their core business applications, but they're opening up to deploy new revenue models for them as well. And we'll talk about how this is working out. But within these same systems that's driving their core business, they are allowing compute to be available because they have great network, they have great locations near densely populated areas, that they believe there's some value there. And if they can turn it into a new revenue stream for them, all the better. And there are these two streams that they are working towards. The first is opening up compute for ultra low latency application deployment. And the second is ultra low latency CDN deployment. Those are two streams that they believe are going to be very valuable both to the market and are willing to invest and open up their hardware for this type of application. We'll talk about how that will work in a minute. The second piece of this, of course, is physical. Okay, now if I can do that and I can wrap it in some standardized, scalable, simply deploy architecture, now they've got something. So they've got their core business, they are opening up their hardware and the access to their equipment for new services to address their revenue model. Now, what does it physically look like? So what it physically looks like is, as you might expect, it starts with standardized open compute hardware. That's a platform that they know, it's scalable, it can handle many different applications, many different services, and it's running their core services as well as their new services on it. All of this is packaged in an easy drop-in-place data center that provides the physical security, the environmental certainty, the ability to be scaled, dropped in place, remotely managed, all in one space on their network property that they have in place. And this is really the foundation of how they're looking to grow their new investments in their future to succeed with the growth of their companies. Now, with that, I might say, okay, now how does it do this? Okay, this is the thing, how their risk, how they're looking to de-risk and open up new revenue streams, and physically how it's being done. How did it happen? So it's happening through a syndicate. This is 4 companies coming together, sitting down with these new companies looking to take a bold step in edge, in the network edge in particular, and putting together a solution that we think makes sense and can scale. So the first company is Schneider Electric, the company that I work for, and we build data centers of all size, from large data centers to small edge data centers you see here. And we're providing what I would consider the anchor integration. We're pulling together all of the physical systems, we're adding the software, we are providing the muscle to deploy at scale, the remote services to ensure that these sites can stay up and running wherever they are in the wild. The second company is Ali's company, ITRenew. And this is really kind of a key element here. It is all built on Open Compute platform, Open Compute software, Open Compute hardware that they are really doing in something with a unique dimension. They are choosing ITRenew because they are going to deploy second life hardware. And that really ticks their sustainability dimension as well. No new carbon had to be embedded in these systems. It is all second life. Plenty of compute, plenty of opportunity for their applications. It just makes sense. The second element there, though, is it really hits a price point that makes their business models tick. So it was very easy for them to make this decision to go Open Compute and also choose the path of ITRenew second life hardware as well. The third company is a little less obvious, but when you think about the wild in these edge and network edge sites, oftentimes they're pretty power constrained. You might have 10 kilowatts that you're trying to maximize core business application, core workloads, and new business workloads. How do you make sure that you are maximizing the utilization, the compute utilization of that site, subject to the power constraints of that site? And Virtual Power Systems is a company that has software that runs on-premise that allows this understanding between the workloads and the power constraints to ensure that these sites stay as maximally utilized as possible. And the last company is probably the key company that unlocks these new value streams. If I have compute that's available, how do I take advantage of this if I'm not a CDN expert or a distributed application expert? Well, EdgeX is a new company that enables that. And what they're doing is they have an operating system that runs locally that enables the execution of distributed applications and CDN applications. They also have cloud orchestration that enables these applications to be loaded and located where they are and where they're needed. And they also are the broker or the interloper, if you will, between the people who need these services and the people who have the infrastructure, and manage the revenue flows to make sure that everyone, the value chain, is treated as well. So this is really kind of a great example of small companies taking an investment that's core to their business, that has edge computing on the network edge, and also opening up these new revenue streams, which we think is the model for the future of edge computing. You cannot deal with smart cities and the IoT of things without having compute everywhere. And to put that compute everywhere, you need to bring in people who have property network access, who can really manage their core sites, their core business, as well as grow their own revenue streams itself. So with that, I want to bring Ali back and have her wrap up and conclude the whole big picture here.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Ali.
So I'll be quick here. We've talked about community, we've talked about TCO, we've talked about sustainability. All of this is enabled by open. It's a massive opportunity for OCP to move now. As I mentioned, a lot of those stats, explosion of data, all this is now, it's happening now. We have the imperative to do this sustainably. When we talk about that in the ITRenew context, it's all about recertified hardware. It's about circular economic models. It's about thinking about everything from the power to the hardware and embodied carbon and so forth. This community, as you can hopefully see in what we just talked about, is very uniquely suited to pull the pieces together. As I mentioned, this is not a lot of new invention. We are all doing a lot of innovation in the community, day in and day out. This one is really about collaboration and business model innovation and thinking about things differently to capture the opportunity. And that opportunity is massive. So there are an infinite number of potential edge network sites, right? Anybody there's real estate can do this. You can run your own apps, you can participate in the network, you can drive monetization, you can enable the broader opportunity. Already today, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data, I just love that word, generated every day in 2021. IDC says by 2024, we're going to spend $250 billion at the edge in just infrastructure. And on the sustainability front, if I start with the $1.5 trillion of spend that's expected to be spent on IoT by 2025 and back out, this is just kind of quick math, if I back out the hardware portion of that and then I back out the server portion of that and I apply our lifecycle analysis of OCP equipment specifically and the carbon that's embedded in OCP equipment, the potential opportunity here is 45 billion kilograms of avoided emissions in terms of carbon. So this is a huge opportunity as we go capitalize and catalyze on this edge opportunity and deploy all the hardware that's critical and essential to everything tech-enabled going forward to do it in the most sustainable way. So I don't know what edge means to each of you, probably something different, but come talk to us. We'd love to figure that out and help all of us collectively go enable this opportunity in the most cost-effective, sustainable way as a community. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.